Among many other things and many other deeds, Professor Elyakim Rubinstein was part of that conference. We welcome the former Supreme Court Justice and we wish to hear your assessments. And I know that you rushed from your class, so we welcome you on stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and sorry for not being here before because of the class. Today, hi, Avi. אפילו עם המסכה. You know, I see Avi Pazner and Marty. Reminds me, it's an old story that many of you may have heard, but I heard it from Joe Sisko, who was the Undersecretary of State under Kissinger, about this guy who was the only survivor of a flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania back in 1889, and thereafter made a living for 60 years on lecturing how I survived that flood. And finally, he got to the Almighty, which will happen to most of us, I assume, and he is asked by the angel in charge, would you like to address the club of the newcomers that we have here and to describe what you want to tell us? So the guy says, look, I can speak about how I survived the flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1889. And the angel says, look, this is such a narrow topic. Why won't you put something more universal? And the guy says, that's all I know. I made my living. He said, if you want to do that, go ahead. But Noach is going to be in the audience. And some people here qualify. And I see Arieli. The last time I think we did something together was to free Sheikh Yassin. Sheikh Yassin, yes. Many, many years ago, I feel like a dinosaur. In any case, and indeed, I think in this whole, I'm the only survivor of Madrid, and my partial claim to fame is that I think there are not too many now alive around that participated in peace efforts with all our neighbors. Egypt, Palestinians, Jordanians, Lebanese, Syrians, some more successful, some less. Today is the anniversary of the Jordanian Peace Treaty. I don't know if it was mentioned here before, but today, October 26, 27 years ago, Prime Minister Rabin of blessed memory signed the treaty with Jordan. I was privileged to be the chair of our delegation to that treaty, and it's symbolic in a way that we are commemorating Madrid, which basically is the father of the treaty in terms of the process, today here, and speaking a little bit about Madrid. I was allocated 10 to 12 minutes. I'm not in a ministerial position that can kind of take it more liberally, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. Madrid did open a new era in the negotiations with our neighbors. We had there Jordan and the Palestinians together. I'll speak in a minute about the wedding. Syria and Lebanon and Egypt was there. And the US was there, and the Russian was there, and the UN was just an observer. This was a difference from the Geneva one-day conference that was convened after the Yom Kippur War in '73, and which was didn't have any continuity. The principles of Madrid: A, direct negotiations; B, the renewal or the establishment of diplomatic relations with some small countries like India and China for the multilateral negotiations that opened thereafter. And it was Shamir's, I was the cabinet secretary at the time, it was Shamir's condition that whoever wants to be in the party should be also talking to us respectfully with diplomatic relations. The Soviets, of course, to come to be the sponsors together with the US, they also renewed the relations. Gorbachev was there, Bush father was there. And indeed, the Madrid conference did not receive its proper attention or proper place in history. So I'll speak a little bit about its contribution. It could happen, I'm sure somebody will talk about it or has talked about it, following the results of the Gulf War. And the Gulf War in January, March 91, when the US and the Soviet Union and Egypt and Syria and other Arab countries, 33 countries, a coalition, went against Iraq because of its occupation of Kuwait. The PLO and Jordan were in an inconvenient situation because they were, this were the other suspected, the PLO, no question, but also Jordan, of being close to Saddam Hussein. After the war, the American administration and Jim Baker was in charge. He wasn't, I wouldn't put him in the Hall of Fame of Israel's closest friends ever, but he deserves the credit of that conference, as well as President Carter deserves the credit of Camp David of '78, of which I also was a participant. He opened 8 or 9 shuttles in this area, and even whoever will not see him as our closest friend, and definitely his style was tough, must acknowledge this contribution. But Shamir was tough also. I can say the media and our minister also said that he was dragged to the conference. I can't say that he was enthusiastic because he was always against international conferences. He had this apprehension that an international conference means some solution that will be forced on us. But he was also a tough negotiator, and he achieved basically 3 conditions, challenges that we had. One, a one-day conference just opening, reopening the conference or reconvening must be with our agreement. B, Palestinian representation. This was always the toughest, not for years and years and years. I myself was involved in who knows how many efforts to get something which will be acceptable to Israel, and we shouldn't be anachronistic. The PLO in those days is still an anathema to Israel, to the governments. It was this was the idea of both the Labour and the Likud governments until Rabin changed course with Peres in Oslo. So my instructions as chair of the Jordanian-Palestinian negotiation in Washington by Rabin were very tough on that, even on symbolic matters. So the request was a Jordanian-Palestinian joint delegation, which none of them loved to have, but they agreed, and the delegates from the territories, not from Tunis. So all the delegates, I heard the name Dr. Haider Abdeshafi by the minister. I read in the newspaper that Professor Golan also was friendly with him or had contact with him. I was friendly with him ever since we met in Madrid. And in fact, I even wrote a eulogy when he passed away, I think in 2008 or so. I wrote a eulogy in an Israeli newspaper on him. We kept contact despite the fact that he was a Palestinian patriot, former communist, but tough, very nationalistic. Honest man, honest man. And something which should be mentioned. So they were all from the territories, and one was born in Jerusalem and lived in America. You know, my late father had a client who told him, let's speak Dugri. My father was a tax accountant. Let's speak Dugri. I told it to Shamir one day, and Dugri, you know, in Arabic is straight, and it's a Turkish word, I believe, Dugri. So I told, Shamir calls me one day after I told him that, and he has an idea which I didn't like. I said, I'll tell you Dugri. He said, Im hayad or bli hayad, with the hand or without the hand. So we had these conditions. I mentioned the diplomatic renewal of relations or establishment of relations, and we had also some assurances from the US. I won't go into it because of the time, on the AIM peace treaties, no independent Palestinian state, which was the policy at the time, and no negotiation with the PLO. In April 91, parallel to Baker, a secret channel was opened between Israel and Jordan. There were contacts with Jordan historically, many of them, but this time we also went to Amman. We means Ephraim Halevi, who was the deputy head of the Mossad, and myself. We went to Amman clandestinely. I had a wig. My daughter saw a picture. They collapsed, and so on. My identity was some kind, and we were as personal messengers of Prime Minister Shamir to coordinate with Jordan towards the conference. And I think it had a contribution. We went a few times. We spent there a day, a night, and another day, and we befriended the king of blessed memory and his brother, Prince Hassan, who later played an important unsung role in the peace treaty negotiation. That's later. The Jordanians were not enthusiastic, as I said, about the wedding with the Palestinians. Already in '88, one should remember, they announced their disconnection from the West Bank. And the Palestinians who wanted to create symbols of independence didn't want. So, but there was no choice. Both were in a situation they had to agree. The PLO, as the minister, did pull the strings from Tunis, although some or many of the Palestinian representatives told us privately that they are not happy about it, about the instructions, about what's going on. Even Haider Abdeshafi, the minister, said that Haider Arikat, yes, but Haider Abdeshafi wasn't a great supporter of Tunis, not at all. This is an understatement. I can testify from many conversations with him. He was also against corruption, by the way. The Saib Arikat, by the way, was asked not to join the conference because he announced a day before the conference that he is PLO. So we told him, sorry, no. Your PLO, no participation. I had a problem with that because with him, he created me a legal problem. He came in the conference hall, he came and shook my hand, which I did, of course, and I said to him, you did all this show with the PLO, and so you want to help your people, don't come to the bilateral negotiation. Okay, he didn't come. He later was accepted by Rabin, but a Knesset member, Dedi Zucker, filed a criminal complaint against me that I am talking to the PLO. This was at the time against the law. And if he said he's PLO, and if I shook his hand and I talked to him 3 minutes, this was of course a political, and I come back home, the Attorney General at the time calls me and says, what do I do with this complaint? I said, close it. And he did. I'm close to finishing. I would like to speak more, but no. The Jordanian delegation then, I have to mention this, was headed by a foreign minister who later disappeared, but my counterpart, who became my personal friend for many, many years until now, and he mentions our friendship in his books. This is Dr. Abdul Salam Majali. He's now in his mid-90s, but he came to visit me a number of times in the Supreme Court. He mentions the human touch. I'm very much I'm a believer in human touch. Example, Majali was sick when we were in Washington sometime later. I asked him, what's your mother's name? You know, in the Jewish tradition, you pray for somebody in the synagogue with his mother's name. That's the sure thing. And Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. And so I asked him, what's your name? He said, why do you need my mother's name? I said, I'll pray for you in the synagogue. Abdul Salam bin Khadija. Abdul Salam bin Khadija, I did the prayer, and he became well. And he writes about it in his book in Arabic, which is his memoir. He writes about that. And he was interviewed, he said, the Israeli delegate, that's me, the chair, opens the door for me when we leave the room, which shows respect to our country. For me, it was natural. He's 22 years older than me. But he mentions that, which means you respect people. And the word respect is important. Let me finish. Madrid was the opening for the next stages and a historic milestone. I will not speak about Oslo, which was a detour from what we did, but I have much to say about it, but I will say that indeed the treaty with Jordan was a direct descendant of Madrid. And I agree in one thing with I agree with many things, but I agree with the minister that we shouldn't lose hope. We shouldn't lose hope. It doesn't look pinky. It doesn't look great with the Palestinians at this point. And the minister said maybe in a few months, maybe in 5 years, inshallah. But for the soldier who goes to the army and has to fight, he should know that besides the security which we have to defend, we have Hezbollah, we have Hamas, we have all these terrible organizations around us. We have Iran, and we have Syria, and we have whatever. But besides doing the work as soldiers who are in charge of our security, they should know there is somebody somewhere in Jerusalem that thinks also how to somehow get into some peace which will be more successful. Thank you very much.